All right, let's go and jump into an email. We've got somebody experiencing, looks like some derealization. I haven't read through the email just yet, but let's go ahead and get into it and kind of see what we uncover. They said, "Hey, Jordan, I don't know how to explain this in a way that makes sense, but it feels like I'm not real anymore. Everything around me looks off, like I'm watching the world through a foggy window, and no matter what I do, I can't break through. I've had these moments before, fleeting ones, but now it's constant. It feels like I'm stuck in a dream that I can't wake up from." So don't take this as a diagnosis or anything like that, but derealization feels like you're living in a dream. People describe it using various metaphors, but you just described it in some of the most common metaphors that people use. They describe it as if they're looking through a foggy window. They may describe it as there's like a wall of glass between them and the material world. They may describe the symptom as feeling like they're living in a dream world. These are all very common metaphors. Now, derealization is a trauma coping mechanism. And whenever you hear the word trauma, you may think, oh, okay, well, this can't be me though. It must be caused from something else because I haven't been in a car accident recently. I didn't recently lose a loved one. I didn't go off to war. I didn't go through a natural disaster recently. But that's a 20th century understanding of trauma. Trauma is a state of nervous system overwhelm. And whenever your nervous system reaches a point of overwhelm, you enter what's called the freeze response. And the freeze response is designed to prepare your nervous system just in case you get eaten by a lion. And part of that nervous system response is that you start to feel dissociated from either your body, which is depersonalization, or from the material world, which is derealization. Dissociation means to separate. It comes from a Latin root word that means to separate. And so if you feel separated from your body or separated from the material world and a lion is eating you, that's going to be far less painful. So I don't know what's going on as far as why this is happening. You probably are like most of the clients that come to work with me, which is you've got a pretty painful history and the stress just built up over time. Every now and then, it's just a major trauma and it's not complex trauma. And in a major trauma, it's a sudden state of overwhelming stress, and they previously had a pretty calm life. But most of the time, especially if you're dealing with constant depersonalization or derealization, like all the time, and it's been a long time, several months or years, almost always there's been a pretty long history of stress and adversity and anxiety. So with that being said, thank you for sharing that. Sorry to hear that you're going through this, but you described like the textbook definitions of derealization. Okay, now this person says, I catch myself staring at my hands and they don't even feel like mine. Okay, so now we're getting into depersonalization, which is where you feel detached from your body. And I used to do that exact same thing. I would constantly look at my hands and be like, okay, these do not feel like my hands. And every time that I would feel that weird detached feeling, I'd go, and I'd try to get away from it. And it was absolutely debilitating for me. You said, my body feels unfamiliar, like I'm watching someone else move, talk, and breathe. Yeah, that's another description of depersonalization is your body feels like a robot. It feels like you're not in control of your body. You're just like observing its movements. And it's very bizarre and terrifying. But depersonalization, like derealization, once again, is a trauma coping mechanism. It is there to separate you from your body because your brain thinks that you're being eaten by a lion because there's such a buildup of stress right now. I try to ground myself to snap out of it, but nothing works. Touching things, talking to people, it all feels so distant. I hear my voice, but it's like it's coming from someone else. Yeah, I remember my voice not only sounded foreign, but it also sounded very loud. I remember at times like just talking would hurt my ears because my ears were so sensitive to sound. But then also it didn't feel like it was my voice. It felt like a stranger's voice. It didn't have that old sense of familiarity that you feel whenever you speak. You don't even really think about it. In fact, you never think about it whenever you do feel connected to your voice. But whenever you feel detached from your voice, you definitely know it, especially if you feel detached from your reflection in the mirror, which I also went through, which is where, you kind of feel like you're looking at a stranger in the mirror. Like you don't really think about it whenever you feel connected to the reflection in the mirror, but you definitely notice it whenever you feel detached from the reflection in the mirror. It is extremely bizarre and scary, and you can't miss it. He then says, the worst part is how disconnected I feel from the people I love. I'll be sitting with my family, but I'm not really there. I'm physically present, but my mind is in the clouds and I don't feel attached to my body. It feels like I'm losing myself, that I don't exist the way that I used to. I'm so sorry to hear that you're having to go through this. And I remember specifically whenever I was in a trauma response, I felt emotionally numb and I didn't feel attached to not only my body and my surroundings, but the people that I loved. And it felt like the history had been ripped out of the history books. And it was sad, but also because I was emotionally numb, I couldn't feel the sadness. So it was even more frustrating, but it just felt off. It felt like an injustice that these people that I had such a long, in depth history with, that I literally felt like they were strangers. It was just extremely, extremely debilitating for me. This person said, I've tried so many things to pull myself back to reality, grounding techniques, breathing exercise, meditation, you name it. But it only ever gives me a few moments of relief before I'm back in this fog. I can't explain it properly to anyone. When I tell my friends, they look at me like I'm speaking another language. You're just stressed, they say. But it's more than that. It's like I'm losing my grip on what's real and I don't know how to fix it. Yeah, so I've actually got a friend of mine who is an anxiety coach, and I'm not going to say his name, but if I said his name, you would probably know him. You've probably seen some of his videos. Great guy. And basically, he's told me before, I always know whenever I get a depersonalization realization client, he's like, it is completely different. He said, Jordan, I don't know how you work with so many of those people. I mean, I work with, DPDR sufferers and generalized anxiety sufferers, but I'm kind of known for, more trauma symptoms. But he said, a depersonalization realization client is extremely difficult, even if I have one of them. And I was like, yeah, try having tons and tons of those clients, which, it's very rewarding, but it's very taxing because, whenever you're experiencing depersonalization realization, that means that you're in a trauma response because DPDR are trauma coping mechanisms. And part of a trauma response is that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex shuts down. This is the timekeeper of the brain. And what that essentially translates into is you can't see an end to your suffering. And that's really the hell of trauma, is that it feels forever. It feels objectively real that you're never going to get out of it. It's one thing if you're going through something terrible and you have an end date, okay, this is going to be over in a couple weeks or whatever, a couple months. But whenever you're feeling the worst that you've ever felt in your entire life and it feels permanent, that's hell on earth. That really is hell on earth. So anyway, with that being said, I just want you to know, people are going to just not understand what you're going through. Trying to explain depersonalization realization to somebody who's never experienced it is only going to lead to frustration, because unless you've experienced the symptoms, they are impossible to understand. You can read about them and hear stories about them and metaphors about them, but unless you've experienced it, people just aren't going to get it. But we have this God-given need for co-regulation and to have people validate our experiences. So even though people are just not getting it, I see my clients do this, and I did this, just still try to explain what's going on, just hoping that maybe eventually they'll get it, but they never do and they never will, because these symptoms are not explainable to people. You have to have gone through it, right? Just like, for example, I've been through some really, really, really heavy narcissistic abuse multiple times. One time it was religious narcissistic abuse, which is just like a double whammy. Yay. And it's like, if you've never been through especially covert narcissistic abuse, like there's really no way to understand it. Because with a covert narcissist, they're so good at concealing their narcissism, most people in the public eye would actually look at them and think that they're just a big ball of joy, right? They don't understand who they are in secret and that it's actually one big act. But anyway, I just use that as an example because, it's also difficult in that regard. But anyway, I always tell my clients, just give up the need for people to understand you. Because if you need that, if it's an expectation, you're going to be very, very, very disappointed and let down, right? It's one thing to desire it, but don't let it become an expectation, because if that happens, that's whenever you start to get really, really frustrated. Every day I wake up hoping it'll be gone. I look in the mirror praying to see myself again, but every time it's the same blank, hollow feeling. I'm scared this is going to last forever. What if this is just how my life is now? I don't know what to do anymore. I'm trying to stay hopeful, but it's hard when nothing feels like it used to. I just want to feel real again. Thanks for listening, Nate. So Thank you, Nate, for sharing this. And, you're not alone. Everybody seems to think that they're the only one that is experiencing these symptoms and the fears that come along with them, especially the fear of permanence. But I've never met somebody experiencing DPDR that didn't feel like they were permanent. They feel permanent because you're in a trauma state. And part of a trauma state is that the timekeeper, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex shuts down and you can't see an end to your suffering, but it's just a trick that your brain is playing on you. You are going to get out of this, but only if you do things that show your body and nervous system that you're safe. If you'd like to know the 5 shifts for how to do that, I've created a free masterclass for you. My gift to you, it's 45 minutes where I'll show you the 5 shifts for how to start to do things that show your body that, hey, there's no need to be preparing for a lion attack. That's really what fight, flight, freeze response are. They're a threat response. They're whenever your body is constantly preparing for a threat that never comes. And so the way that we get you out of this is to show your body and nervous system that you're safe. And once we can show your body and nervous system that you're safe, then depersonalization realization won't need to be there because your body will not be in fight, flight, freeze response anymore. Most people make the mistake with depersonalization realization of directly trying to get rid of the symptoms. They assume that because the symptoms feel so terrible that they must be the problem. And I get it. I experienced them for many years. They were absolutely debilitating, but as scary as they are actually biologically correct responses whenever your body and nervous system are at a point of overwhelm. And so what we need to do is get your body out of a state of overwhelm. We need to do things that show your body that you're safe, and then DPDR will indirectly shut off. That is it. Have a good day. Take care.